Rebecca Clarke, 1886-1979, compositrice de musique classique et altiste virtuose. Rebecca Clarke est l'une des plus importantes compositrices de la première moitié du XXe siècle au Royaume-Uni. À la fin de sa vie, dans les années 70, son petit-neveu Christopher Johnson veut cataloguer ses partitions.
Actually, she had virtually the whole of her output, starting from when she was a teenage amateur, all the way to when she stopped writing. So this is basically her whole inner artistic life. Do I really want to open that up to the world? And if so, how? She had to stop and think about that. And also there was the element of mortality. She increasingly felt like she was being turned into a historical figure rather than a living soul. And she had a lot of people crowding around her. She had the New York Public Library, for example, actively courting her for her manuscripts and papers. And she was deeply flattered, of course, because this is like, I don't know, the Bibliothèque Nationale coming after you, or the British Library or something, especially for a composer.
Dans les années 1970, Christopher Johnson rassemble pour son doctorat les partitions de Rebecca Clarke. Le travail de catalogage sans compromis questionne Rebecca Clarke. Elle y oppose un peu de résistance.
For me, the process of persuading her to let me do it was mostly a matter of arguing about those early pieces and the pieces that she didn't think were so successful. She wanted to bargain to have those factored out or omitted altogether or treated differently. And there were some pieces later on that she wasn't happy with. And she said, well, can't we do something about that? And I said, no, you have to understand this. I'm doing this as the beginning bibliographic project for my doctoral work. So it has to be a solid piece of work on my part. And I can't say I did part of the job, but not the whole job. Also, it's in the nature of a thematic catalog to be complete and exhaustive. So everything has to go in there, even if you don't like it, even if it's a juvenile survival, even if it's existing only in fragments, even if it was just a draft of something that you never completed. All of that, or even if it's something that's lost, but you remember its existence and we can attach some kind of chronology to it. Here, all of that has to go in and be accounted for one way or another, or it's just a list. It's not a thematic catalog, properly speaking, and it's not a research vehicle. And from my self-interested perspective, that's what I need in order to complete the course requirement and get the grade. And that's what you need and what posterity will need in order to feel like they've got some kind of basic command of you and your works. So she had to think about that. She held me off for about 2 weeks. And I finally said, look, you have to say yes or no, because I have to come up with a project and have it approved and get to work. So finally she said yes. And then once we got to work on it, once she started bringing the things out and worked on dating the things that didn't have dates already attached to them, she got interested in it again. And she became very active and quite enthusiastic about it. She ultimately got tired of me being spread out all over her dining room. But that was a side issue. She really got into the music itself, so that a lot of manuscripts that she hadn't looked at in decades, some of them, or even some of those things that she had never been quite satisfied with, she'd look at them again and say, oh dear, parallel fifths. So she'd quickly fix that. in pencil, or, oh, no, that's the wrong accidental. She'd fix that. Or, oh, it needs a cautionary accidental here. Fix that. But Dan was taking out the trash the day she was working on the piano piece, and he found the ripped up manuscript, and he went to her with the thing in hand and said, "Beckel, people are going to want to know about this someday." And she looked at him over the top of her glasses for a long moment and then said, "Dan, I'm not Beethoven, you know." And she didn't care about it. Once the old version was done, it was over. She wasn't interested in posterity. She didn't really think of herself that way. But I would imagine that kind of real world, eyes wide open, hard-nosed, professional, get it done and then it's done practicality entered into her editorial work in all of her publications. Certainly everything in her diaries suggests that. She works very hard to present a fully developed manuscript that she has thoroughly tested on the instruments and on the bodies themselves in virtually every case. Anything that goes off to the publisher, she has a sit down with herself and another top-level professional, goes through the whole thing, torture tests it, checks it out, makes whatever final corrections she wants. It goes off to the publisher. The proofs come back. She reads the proofs, and again, in every major case, tries it over again on the instrument, on the body, makes her corrections, sends it off, and then you don't hear of it again until the printed copies come back. And this is especially true of major work and her first big publication, the sonata. She wasn't deeply knowledgeable about the publishing or the production process, but I think she recognized fellow working professionals when she saw them, and she understood these people have professional needs and material needs of their own. They need clarity, they need guidance up front, they need me to do my work so they can do their work, so the whole thing can move along. And I have no business making difficulty for them farther down the line unless it's a case of absolute necessity. Which is, so from a publisher's perspective, oh my God, she's the ideal composer. But, and I'm guessing a lot of this, but this is what arises from the diary evidence.
Le manuscrit de la sonate pour alto et piano, qui est aujourd'hui déposé à la Library of Congress à Washington, correspond à l'original envoyé au concours Coolidge. Par ailleurs, Clarke gardait une autre copie pour elle-même.
She submitted the piece in deep anonymity. Virtually no one had any inkling of this, to the Coolidge competition in 1919. Then the tie happened in September of that year. It burst upon the press. There was a big sensation in the fall of 1919. The offer of publication came in July 1920. But the copy that's now in the Library of Congress, which I'm assuming is the one you're speaking of, that's the one she submitted. So that was always an extra copy. And also, additionally, it involved an extra hand because she ran out of time, and I imagine her hands started cramping in writing out the fair copy for submission, and her sister-in-law, Beryl, kicked in and saved the day and did the whole of the viola part herself, so Clarke didn't have to do it. And she barely made the submission deadline. It's interesting in order to see what must have been added before the 1919 festival was over, which is to say about a year before, or 2 years before publication. The final gesture in the piece, you know, there's a big sustained chord at the end, ba da 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 da, boom. Well, in the original, the boom isn't there. That was added in pencil. Look at the last page very, very carefully and blow it up. And you can see the difference between the ink and the pencil edition. And I'm quite certain that when she submitted it, it was just that long radiant cord with the fermata on the end of it. And either she realized it needs a button, the manuscript or the autograph copy that was submitted to the publisher for production was marked up editorially and then further marked up by the engraver and then further marked up against the proofs. So whatever you started out with was a mess and really useless for anything else after all of that process had been worked through. By and large, not just with Clarke, but with every composer that I'm aware of during that period, certainly with British composers, the manuscript was essentially discarded after the final sign-off occurred and the piece was published. And apart from, well, the Coolidge submissions, the sonata and the trio, but that's something of a different thing. Those were the presentation copies that Clarke made for submission, knowing that they would become the property of the Coolidge operation. So she had her own copy, the manuscript, as it were, that she then worked from in order to generate whatever the publisher worked from. And I suspect, because things like that, well, anything you do by hand is a big copying job. So I would suspect, given the almost total absence, offhand, I can't think of a single thing that she published in her own lifetime where there's a surviving manuscript. That, I mean, there may be a couple, but those would be like drafts.
Clarke a réalisé une version de la sonate pour violoncelle et piano dans laquelle des différences entre le manuscrit et la partition apparaissaient.
I did ask her about something where there was a substantial difference in the cello part. And she said, well, they're both good. But in every case that I can see, what she does in the published version, fully proofread and coming directly from her hands, always tends in the direction of graphic simplicity and clarity, which of course is exactly what you would want in a published edition. That's going to have to go forth and speak for itself. So I think there's a consistent picture here where there's a published edition that she took part in. That's the piece. Everything else is interesting. It was a substantial instrument because, again, a big physique. It was acquired by her father in Italy. And she said he had terrible taste in some things, but remarkably fine judgment in musical instruments. And this one was something he just picked up and brought home. And then she wound up using it for the rest of her life. I've got the certificate here from Hill in London. With the exception of the head, it is by the brothers Giovanni and Francesco Grancino, who worked in Milan at the end of the 17th century. The head is the work of the brothers Montegazza of Milan, who worked about 1800. But speaking of the hands, her publicity stills tended to obscure them a little bit. Got a little cuff over there. but you can see it. These are the 6 young ladies of 1913, the first professional women in professional orchestra in London. And she's over here. And again, you can see the pretty dramatic difference between her hands and the hands of the others. Here are things like, this is talking about her as part of a larger ensemble, but the reviewer writes, the extreme delicacy and beauty of their touch upon the strings, the artistic interpretation and the magnificent harmonies of the work gave great delight, and the rapt attention given to the performance from the first note to the last showed how keen was the appreciation of the audience. You see something like this again and again and again in accounts of her work and in general accounts of the ensembles that she worked with. So it seems to me there's a kind of directness, clarity, a real core tone, you know, maybe not pinpoint pitch, but real solid tone to it. And also great richness of color. Another one, she's doing that Wilhelm arrangement of the Preislied from Die Meistersinger that was once very famous. The grand tone produced from the viola being splendid in its purity and depth. Most of them mild, praised her playing, the beauty of it, the depth of it, the depth of tone, and especially the sensitivity and the life and the rhythmic vivacity that they brought to it, and the ability to carry an audience along with them. Well, you know, I think if anyone deserves credit for any dramatic shift in Clarke's renown, it was Toby and his publicists. He was familiar with sonata before 1976, when this 90th birthday radio broadcast coalesced. And he was invited to play it with Emanuel Ax live on the broadcast. And he had the opportunity of going and coaching the piece with Rebecca Clarke in her living room, because at that point she was too crippled to get out and go places. They became personally very close. And she not only loved his playing, but I think she truly loved him. He was a fellow charmer, so they just, you know, set each other off like a house of fire right off the bat. But they kept up with each other. And then Toby was so excited by that experience with the sonata, he started featuring it in his performance repertoire and his tour itineraries. He did it in a big concert at Alice Tully Hall. And then he went over to England and did it on the BBC and did it in recital there. And there was a lot of further activity, all of it amply covered in the relevant press and favorably reviewed, all that. And Clarke was very active in getting in touch with all of her English contacts over there, saying, this is happening, listen in if you possibly can, be aware of it, and essentially help talk it up. And oh, by the way, at that point, here's another piece that I wrote during the 1940s that's never been done very much, still in manuscript. You might want to think about that too. I mean, she was a total self-promoter despite well, you never absolutely knew with her whether she really liked what you were doing or whether she acted like she did in order to help you in some other way. With Toby, I think she really liked what she was hearing. And he asked her, he told me, he said, you know, I want this to be a faithful representation of your concept of the piece. And she said, oh no, do it your way. Do it your way. And he said, well, I have departed in a few ways here and there. Is that all right? And she said, oh, yeah, we were fine, whatever. When he did it, actually, I think this was the last time she was out of the apartment, at least to a public event, was that recital Toby gave at Alice Tully Hall, where he played the sonata, and she waved in a very grand way from the balcony, or the box, I'm sorry, at one side. He took the very ending of the piece up an octave at some point, right towards the end. I don't remember enough about the details to say for sure where it was, and I'm not a violist myself, so I can't speak authoritatively. But at any rate, he went up an octave for pizzazz and sonority, and he thought, oh my God, she's going to kill me. And she just waved it off and said, oh no, it was wonderful. I loved it. Actually, there's a parallel story. Very early in her playing career, this would have been either the very first year when after she was thrown out of the house and had to support herself, or early in the year thereafter. She was working with a quartet that was based around May Mukley, and they were working on the Vaughan Williams G minor quartet, which already had been premiered, but evidently the premiere was not entirely comme il faut. So there was an idea of a subsequent performance that Vaughan Williams would work with very closely, and it would really put the seal on the piece there. Well, Clarke is in a rehearsal. Vaughan Williams attends. And I don't know if you know the piece, but it has some gorgeous viola solos in it. And at one point, she just went completely off the rails and hit a real howler in one of those beautiful solos. I don't know what it was particularly, but she said it stank on ice. It was so awful. And she was mortified. And she, in the break, she went to Vaughan Williams and apologized. And he said to her, you know, I'm not sure, but I think I like it. Do you remember what you did? And she said, well, of course, he was just trying to make me feel better, but it was a lovely thing to do. So she may have been speaking to Toby in very much the same spirit, but she did tell him, this is one of the reasons why her published editions are somewhat under-edited by normal standards. You know, they're a little light on the phrasing and the articulations, and especially on the fingerings. Because she said, I've got these great big long arms and these enormous hands, and my way of doing it, you know, since it's an awkward, cumbrous instrument anyway, my way of doing it may be suicide to anybody with a different physique or a different physicality or a different musculature. So I don't want to appear to bind people to it. And the same thing applies to interpretation. I'm sure if somebody had done something really heinous that she felt misrepresented her or her intention, she would have spoken out. And there were other things on that broadcast performance that she never complained about, but she made it very clear privately. She was not amused. The pieces were transposed way farther than she was prepared to think about. And she certainly didn't say anything to the performers, certainly didn't say anything to the broadcaster, never lodged a complaint, but in private conversations, it was abundantly clear what she thought. But with Toby, as I say, I think she recognized a fellow spirit at a personal level and a congenial fellow performer. as well. You know, they thought in very much the same way. She was an improbable person, but a wonderful person. And she loved young people at that point in her life, loved them. And she was so great to be with. She made you feel like a better and a more important person just by being with her. And especially when you were alone.